Because their framing was the idea of who should have the authority over the evolution of language. Is it the national or the international? On the very superficial level, if you analyze the phrasing of the motion, how the hell do you expect opening government and closing government to support national and international at the same time, when in fact, under their model, it's conflicting, Mr. Chair, members of this House. It's highly unreasonable for us to assume that under opening government. That's first. But more importantly, if you look at their idea, they're not clashing to the motion. Because on their side, they're still proving that there must be a formal institution to arbitrate over these particular matters, Mr. Chair, members of this House. What they're saying is that, well, a national system should still be in place. But we don't want an international body, Mr. Chair, members of this House. This is pussyfooting because they have to defend why an absolutely organic model of evolution is something that's more beneficial and something that's more legitimate for us in today's debate, Mr. Chair, members of this House. And if you look at the kind of defense that they have, Mr. Chair, members of this House, it's completely incongruent. I want to talk about the 3 lines of attack and rebuttals for leaders of opposition. Let's ask first the question, which upholds the principle of language? Because according to him, that well, people and individuals will always have the tendency to evolve and make languages useful and adaptive for themselves because it's a natural incentive or something like that. But we think, Mr. Chair, members of this House, that clearly it's highly responsive to anarchy. Because we already argue that, well, certain interpretations of certain symbols and meanings can clearly be different due to personal experiences, to history, the kind of socialization that you have, Mr. Chair and members of this House. Therefore, if you want to look at the idea of having a common ground, which is the main principle of language, that cannot exist under that kind of model, which is a purely organic model. Because we have already analyzed, Mr. Chair, that if you have a purely organic model, you don't necessarily filter out those unnecessary developments, Mr. Chair, members of this House, in the form of languages, in the form of subcultures, or what have you. So thank you. So clearly, under this issue, they clearly fall. So for the second level, why is a formal institution that governs evolution important, Mr. Chair, members of this House? Because we think that if you don't have an institution that mainstreams these kinds of ideas through, I don't know, development of your dictionaries or what have you, these kinds of things, Mr. Chair, members of this House, can never be reinterpreted and be analyzed by your people. Because these people have a tendency to be conservative, Mr. Chair, members of this House, of the kind of languages that they use, Mr. Chair, members of this House. You need a kind of institution that will push you and say that, well, this is not anymore the right thing to do. Don't stick with convenience. You have to go with formality in this kind of debate, in these kinds of things. But more importantly, on the last level, on the idea of rights, because this is the biggest argument of opening opposition. They argue that, well, people have the right to develop their own language. Well, we'll concede to that, but it's not absolute. Because, Mr. Chair, the importance of the point that I raised a while ago is that, well, if a person feels that the word death means it's not going to be paid, Mr. Chair and members of this House, then technically you're infringing on rights of other people, Mr. Chair and members of this House. This kind of confusion obviously defeats the entire value that opening opposition also wants to protect in this particular debate, Mr. Chair and members of this House. So it's important to have a clear filter in this particular case. But more importantly, we think, Mr. Chair, that, well, if they have the right to create meanings, Mr. Chair, members of this House, we don't necessarily see how this is infringed by the kind of model that opening government wants to forward. Well, thanks. Why? Because if you look at the model of opening government, we have told you that, well, before there's an evolution through formalized sectors, you always have an organic change, a demand and a clamor from the grassroots to say that, well, it's a bit outdated or what have you. Through the existence, for example, of subcultures and countercultures, Mr. Chair, members of this House. For example, whatever. Before, yes.
The rights are unnecessarily infringed because while you consider the value of organic change, you still dictate what you think is necessary or unnecessary change. How do you arbitrate that standard from that third party?
Well, Mr. Chair, members of this House, if you argue rights in a very abstract manner, you don't see how these rights are actualized in the first place. Because even if they have the right to create words, they can't even enjoy using it because no one can really formalize mainstreamize their ideas to share members of this house. Because the value of these formal institutions, I think, is very important. So when we make contributions, let me be right. I want to look at how national and international bodies allows for equal representation for the inculcation of subcultures and countercultures that in every society is necessarily infringed and hampered, Mr. Chair, and members of this house. How do I want to run this? We have contextualized, Mr. Chair, a very diasporic nature of human societies, Mr. Chair, members of this house. We have continuous migration and stuff like that due to globalization, Mr. Chair, members of this house. What's the point of this argument? We think if you look at these kinds of things, a certain minority will always be hampered through their use of language in a certain society, primarily because the mainstream society will not necessarily have the adversarial effect, adversarial response on them, being that it's not okay for you to inculcate your language to our language and stuff like that. And if you look at, for example, history, Mr. Chairman of this house, the word boondocks, for example, was coined from after World War II because of the American soldiers who have returned from the US, and it's formalized and mainstreamized because of the formal institutions that exist in status quo. There's an exclusive benefit, Mr. Chairman of this house, that they can even actualize at the end of the day. Because we think there's always an adverse response of your mainstream society, of your dominant society, to certain subcultures, Mr. Chair, members of this house. Because obviously, these subcultures are something that's not natural for them, or not formal, for example. These things, Mr. Chair, members of this house, we concede are important, Mr. Chair, members of this house. That's why it's important to inculcate them to mainstream society by the virtue of these formal institutions at the end of the day. We think it's important, Mr. Chair, member of this house, and because it's important, and because the formal institution is the only institution that can mainstream this, we're very proud to close. Thank you very much.